The Daleks are undeniably one of the most iconic creations to come out of Doctor Who. Ask someone who has never seen Doctor Who before what they know about the show, and they'll either say TARDIS or Dalek. When these metal monstrosities from Skaro burst onto our television screens in 1964, they were an instant sensation with the general public, starting a phenomenon known as Dalek Mania. The Daleks are as much of British 1960s iconography as the Beatles and the miniskirt. What made the Daleks so popular? Was it the script, the voice, or the design? Or was it just the perfect storm? Raymond Cusick began working at the BBC in 1960 as a replacement designer when others were on holiday. By 1962, he became a full-time designer after his work on Stranger on the Shore was well received. In late 1963, Cusick was chosen to design for a new science fiction serial called Doctor Who. He was tasked with creating the look of the sets and the props for a brand new 7-part story under the production title The Mutants. He was one of 2 designers attached to the serial. The other was Ridley Scott. Scott was the initial choice to design for the story, but had a scheduling conflict and could only do the design for the principal photography and not for any pre-filmed inserts. Verity Lambert, the producer of Doctor Who, argued that having 2 designers on one serial made no sense, and Ridley stepped aside. Ultimately, Ridley Scott never worked on Doctor Who. Instead, he went on to have a very successful career as a director, most famous for the 1979 film Alien. A question often asked by Doctor Who fans is, could Ridley have struck gold with designing the Daleks? Which is a question we'll never know the answer to. Now that Raymond Cusick was locked in for the Dalek serial, his work began. He was given a written brief by writer Terry Nation on what the Daleks look like. Hideous machine-like creatures. They are legless, moving on a round base. They have no human features. A lens on a flexible shaft acts as an eye. Arms with mechanical grips for hands. Raymond discussed further ideas with the production team. Associate producer Mervyn Pinfield suggested that he just dress someone up in a cardboard tube and paint them silver, much to Raymond's disgust. He ended up calling Terry Nation directly, where Nation discussed the Georgian State Dance Company performers who seemed to glide across the stage. Raymond would describe Nation as uninterested during this conversation, which isn't far from Terry's own account when discussing the gliding Daleks. That's what I wanted for the Daleks. The rest of it came easily. You put on an eye and then something else for the hands. We made a big mistake with the hands, of course. We should have been smarter, but I had no faith in the show, remember that. It was the old writer's axiom. Take the money and fly like a thief. I really didn't think that it could work. With a budget of £500 to create all 4 Daleks, Cusick got to work. I've also seen figures from £250 to £750, so take that figure with a pinch of salt. Or pepper. Like a pepper pot? Like the shape of the Daleks? I'll stop. He began sketches on Friday and had them completed by the end of the weekend. His early designs varied significantly from the final look, but still followed Nation's description quite closely. He experimented with adding a tricycle to aid movement, but couldn't find one that would be the right fit. Instead, caster wheels would be added to the base, and the operator would have to move with their feet. They wanted to do anything to avoid looking like a person in a metallic outfit. The design had to avoid having an operator standing upright. I drew a chair which was ergonomically 18 inches from the ground and sketched an average person sitting on it. Once you've got that basic drawing of a person sitting sideways on a chair, if you draw straight lines around him, you've got a pyramid shape. So the silhouette of the Dalek actually came directly from the shape of a person sitting down in a chair. From here, Cusick passed on the designs to Shawcraft Models. The original intention was to create the Dalek base with plywood, but the prop makers explained that it would be more expensive than casting it in fiberglass. If they wanted wood, they'd have to get a carpenter. It just goes to show that many decisions are made purely based on budget rather than imagination. One of Cusick's early ideas included lights within the base of the Dalek to light up when it was angry or irritated, but they just couldn't afford the batteries needed to power it. And just like that, the Daleks were born. During a screening, Cusick asked Nation what he thought of the Dalek design, and he said, "Nah, they're alright." But the viewing public was slightly more excited about the Daleks than that. Cusick recalled walking into Verity Lambert's office after the broadcast of the Dalek serial. That's the mail for William Hartnell and the rest of the cast, and that's the stack of letters from people asking us to bring the Daleks back. The Daleks were a certified hit, and their popularity was only growing. The final 2 episodes of the Dalek serial had reached over 10 million viewers, a massive jump from the 6.4 million for An Earthly Child's final part. A sequel was already being discussed internally by the end of the serial's broadcast. Merchandise exploded onto the scene, from Dalek toys to Dalek books to Dalek, well, anything. It even led to 2 motion pictures starring Peter Cushing as Doctor Who. The BBC had initially only committed to 13 episodes of the 52-week run, so I think it's fair to say that the Daleks' creation was a big factor in Doctor Who surviving past the edge of destruction. The phenomenon was labelled Dalek Mania. Cusick saw the money Terry Nation and the BBC were making off his design and felt like he was missing out. As a BBC employee, anything he created on the job was BBC property. He had no legal right to any profits made from his designs. Nation, on the other hand, was a freelance writer, not a BBC employee. He wrote the story and created the Dalek, so legally, he got a piece of the pie. Raymond asked if he could get a little taste of that pie and was given a one-off payment of £100, roughly £2,500 in today's money. Compared to what Nation and the BBC have made off the Daleks since, it's nothing. Raymond recalled an encounter with Terry Nation before the production of the Cushing Dalek films. "I was very friendly with Terry Nation, and we appeared on the very famous show called Late Night Lineup. And I remember asking him after the show, 'What about the films, Terry?' And I never saw him again." By 1966, Cusick had grown tired with the pace of designing for Doctor Who. It was 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, for 2.5 to 3 years. That's why I came off it. He also discussed that he found designing for science fiction to be terribly repetitive, especially since as a BBC staff designer, you had to follow what the writers wrote. And after a while, it began to bore him. But the Daleks persisted, their designs changing throughout the years, but the same elements that Cusick created are still incorporated every time, even to this day. Even though the silhouette might change, it is still recognisably a Dalek, thanks to Cusick. In 2008, Raymond visited the Doctor Who production offices in a behind-the-scenes feature called Cusick in Cardiff, where he was shown the new series Daleks and offered his opinions on them. He seemed less than impressed. He argued that the rivets on the design are earthly. The Daleks are supposed to be otherworldly, and to the Daleks, bolts and rivets are old-fashioned. He hilariously describes the TARDIS set as a dog's breakfast, so clearly the new series' approach to Doctor Who design was not to his personal taste. It must have been difficult for Raymond, someone whose legacy is so important to the history of this cultural juggernaut of a show, one where his payment did not reflect the work that he created, where the answer to who created the Daleks is either Terry Nation or Davros, and rarely Raymond Cusick. His design is one of the most important creations in televisual science fiction history. Without the success of the Daleks, Doctor Who would not have lasted past its first season. Although many people were involved in the creation of the Dalek, Cusick's work was an important part of it and should be remembered. So when people ask you, who created the Daleks? Maybe say Terry Nation and Raymond Cusick. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Josh Snares YouTube channel.